We are going to be having some, working some bills and dealing with balloon amendments. We are trying to come up with a proper solution for how we're going to handle those balloon amendments. It looks like the revisor will we will either pick them up or deliver them to the revisor will deliver them. We'll have them here, keep them here because a lot of balloon amendments are not offered. And either Florence and I will have them. If you do not wish to receive your balloon amendment by paper, just let us know. And I believe Adam will actually, when it's offered, will be describing it. I am going to go over this with Adam, and I'm going to try and get a hold of Gordon to make sure everything will work in that forecast. I don't plan on working a bill today till we can get it set up, but there's been some questions on how we're going to handle that. And I didn't know if everybody felt comfortable having Florence hand out the balloon amendments or how that works. I'll give committee members time. Also, not starting today, but starting tomorrow, I have been instructed by the President's Chief of Staff that members on WebEx are not allowed to ask questions. I talked to the Majority Leader. He's going to clarify that to be sure. But until that point, after tomorrow on, I'm not going to be able to have committee members on WebEx. I don't understand why. But today, since we all are on WebEx and we're trying to avoid the weather and everything, we're going to continue on. But there may be changes coming, trying to give you a heads up on that. It's crazy times right now, but we're going to get through it. With that, well, the meeting's open. Are there any bill introductions from the committee? Seeing none. Any bill introductions from the audience? Are there any bill introductions from the WebEx? Seeing none, we'll turn our attention to the hearing. We're going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 25. Adam, would you be ready to give us a briefing?
Apologize for that. Yes, I forgot to hit on mute. Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 25 would be a hands-free or not requiring, in certain circumstances, prohibiting the use of a cell phone, mobile phone while driving bill. As part of my write-up, I included the background. Currently under Kansas statute, there is a prohibition against operators of a motor vehicle from manually typing, sending, or reading on a wireless communication device. Purely just as background is what the current status of the law is. What Senate Bill 25 would do is it would prohibit the use of a mobile telephone while operating. This would be for all individuals, while operating in a school zone or a road construction zone. So you couldn't use a mobile telephone in either one of those zones. Also, the bill would completely prohibit the use of a mobile telephone by individuals 18 years of age and younger while they're operating the motor vehicle. There are certain exceptions to this requirement, to these prohibitions, namely that law enforcement acting within the scope of their employment would be exempt, and also individuals who use a hands-free device would also be exempt. Additionally, the bill would allow individuals to use their phone in certain circumstances, and that would be the report current or ongoing illegal activity to law enforcement, prevent imminent injury to a person or property, summon medical or other emergency assistance, or delay information between transit or for-hire operator and the operator's dispatcher if the device is permanently affixed to the motor vehicle. As a final provision, there is a kind of a standard for enforcement. Essentially, holding a mobile telephone when it's restricted would constitute prima facie evidence of a violation. What that means is essentially that if the cop sees you holding your phone, if you're either under 18 or you're located in a school or road construction zone, that's essentially default evidence that you violated the statute. That's what that means. And lastly, the fine found guilty would be $60. And then, of course, you would also owe court costs. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions? Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does this constitute a moving violation? You know?
That's something I will have to check on. I always have to get re-familiar with that. Currently, I believe it's just a traffic infraction. I don't believe, but let me look into that one.
Thank you.
Hey, Adam, this, since it states mobile telephone, it wouldn't prohibit like tow truck drivers or the storm spotters or school bus drivers operating their radios?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that's correct. That under the bill, it doesn't define mobile telephone. So to some extent, it's a little how that would be interpreted. It would be a question for interpretation. As long as it's not a mobile telephone, would fit under that commonly understood definition. I agree that if it's a radio or something like that, that would, to my intent, would not meet the definition of the common understanding of a mobile telephone, but that would be more or less an enforcement, something got to go to enforcement.
Okay, I might have you look into it because I know some of the 2-meter radios that a lot of our National Weather Service storm spotters use actually have a keypad on them and can be used for a mobile telephone at the time. If you could look into that for me, and we'll get back later on that. Committee, further questions?
Mr. Chair, since we're still on Wednesday and we're asking questions still, can I go ahead and ask a question?
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. Adam, you said it's prima facie, meaning they're automatically determined guilty if they have the cell phone in their hand in these circumstances. Even though it would be, as explained, it was it's if it's hands-free, meaning they don't have to have their ear, the phone up to their ear. But it sounds like the law is more restrictive that even in hands-free mode, if I'm holding the phone as one is wont to do when one has a smartphone out and has it on speaker, that's still considered to be an infraction, correct? Like if I have the phone, but I'm still going hand speakerphone?
Adam?
Yeah, I'm going through it just to make sure the definition of hands-free device, just so. Yes, that is correct, because the hands-free device under the definition under the bill would essentially without use of either the operator's hands. So just holding your phone and speaking on speaker would my interpretation be a violation.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question when appropriate. Senator Hopper. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question, if it mentions construction zone and trying to get clarification on that. So if you're stopped in a construction zone and a workman has a stop sign, would that, and your car is completely stopped, would that be a violation of this new statute if you were then using your mobile phone or hands-free device and had it up to your ear? Or even, as Senator Pittman mentioned, we're using it on speakerphone, but it was in your hand.
Adam?
Just make sure.
Let me ask it another way too. If you're in a school zone and you're parked waiting to pick up your child, and you're trying to call your child and tell her you're the or him that you're the third car in line behind the school bus, if they're looking for you to pick them up, would that be a violation also if you're completely stopped?
This gets a little tricky in the fact that generally if you're on the road, on the roadway in line of traffic, essentially a stop sign or something like that, my interpretation would be yes, you could be cited. You're you're in charge of your vehicle, you're in the it'd be like sitting at a stop or a stoplight, and it'd be no different than that, because that would be constitute a violation. If you're waiting, off on the side of the road, or in like a parking lot or something like that, that of course would be a different scenario. If you're standing still like in the roadway waiting for your calling, conceivably yes, that would be a violation.
And then I assume the same if you're stopped in a line of traffic in a construction zone with one of the people that holds a stop sign, and you say, oh, I'm stopped here for 5 minutes waiting for that next line of traffic to get through the single lane, you'd still be in violation if you were making a call on your phone while you were stopped because you're in the roadway.
That's correct. There's no exception for, stalled or standing traffic.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions for Adam? Thank you, Adam. We'll turn our attention to our FirstCon Free proponents. Presentation by Travis Lowe, representing AAA. Welcome to the committee this year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Travis Lowe, appearing today on behalf of AAA Kansas as a proponent of Senate Bill 25. AAA proudly serves over 350,000 Kansans from across the state, and on behalf of AAA, it's our pleasure to support legislation that we believe will improve road safety as well as innocent bystanders near the roads. And I appreciate all the dialogue before the testimony began. Hopefully I can provide a bit more insight on some of the questions that were asked by the committee members. And to be clear, when we use the term handheld usage during our testimony, we're referring to holding the phone in your hand while you're operating the vehicle. We're not referring to making phone calls while you're using Bluetooth technology. We're not referring to making phone calls while it's on speakerphone, in your lap, or even in the cup holder. We're referring to handheld usage. And actually, on page 1, line 15 and 19, it does refer to the definition or to the term mobile telephone, but it does say this act shall not apply to when it's in hands-free mode, which should hopefully differentiate between those two different scenarios, but we can cover that a little bit more in depth if you'd like. For the veterans of the committee, this is probably a familiar topic. This committee and your counterpart committee from across the rotunda have seen similar proposals in the past. However, Senate Bill 25 marks a different approach. Over the last 10 or 11 months, AAA has worked with a very large stakeholder group to address the concerns that have been voiced over particular proposals such as these types of restrictions in the last several years. The group all agreed that we do believe distracted driving is a problem on our roads. The Kansas Department of Transportation cites that 15,000 crashes per year estimated are due to distracted driving. Thus, about 1 in 4 total crashes, they surmise, are related to distracted driving. Now, we know distracted driving is a pretty large encompassing term, but I think we all might agree that, using your phone, being distracted with your phone is certainly a large contributor to that effect, and we all have probably seen scenarios as we drive down the interstates, passing vehicles or being passed by vehicles where we see scenarios that are probably not the best way to drive. But we do want to talk a little bit about how Senate Bill 25 is different from previous approaches. And I'll probably walk through just 3 different scenarios to make sure it's crystal clear and to the best of our ability. As the reviser mentioned, this pertains to the handheld use of a cell phone for drivers under the age of 18, and then would apply to all drivers when in a work construction zone or in a school zone during the designated hours. Now, you may be familiar, Kansas has a graduated driver's license program, and when teens are driving under the graduated driver's license program, they are not able to use an electronic device of any kind. So in that age can fluctuate, but roughly 16 and a half is when we see kind of the top of that end. And so this bill would essentially increase that about 1.5 years up to the point where they turn 18, but not be able to use that handheld phone at all in handheld mode. So it's about 1.5 years change, but it's still not as restrictive actually as a graduated driver's license for drivers 15 and 16 years old. As it applies to the work construction zones, this would take place anytime you're driving within them. They're clearly marked with orange signs that say begin work construction zone. And when you leave the work construction zone, there's an orange sign that says leaving or end work construction zone. So this law would pertain to when you're driving through that work construction zone. Our written testimony details many examples that we see of hazardous conditions during the work construction zone area. We've all seen it, the uneven lanes, temporary rerouting of lanes, the concrete barriers at times, no shoulders, but most importantly, workers working near the site. And so again, this would apply anytime we're driving through that. We need to make sure we are as alert as possible going through those zones. For school zones, this would just apply during the posted designated hours, which is generally when students are arriving to school and when the students are leaving school. So this would not be a prohibition all day, all night. Those hours entering a school zone are already by statute clearly marked, and there's usually yellow flashing lights, but not all have that from my understanding from across the state. This would not apply to college campuses. This would just fall within the existing statute's definition with elementary schools, junior high, and high schools. A little bit more about the mechanics of 25 and how we arrived at Senate Bill 25 as a large stakeholder group. We know that vehicle technology is evolving. We've had many conversations in this committee regarding that process, and we didn't want this bill to impede current or future vehicle technology. So we worked with the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, the telecom groups, to make sure that the definitions were all mutually agreed upon before the introduction of this bill. We know some local governments like the City of Manhattan and Senator Hawks' district or Junction City as well have already more expansive laws on the books with a little bit more of an aggressive approach. This bill would not impact the local governments. This would just create a minimum layer across the state that would apply to all Kansas roads and highways. And if a city down the road wanted to do something a little bit more expansive, like a City of Manhattan, they can certainly do that. We worked with the League of Kansas Municipalities over the fall to make sure that this bill had passed their muster, didn't impede their ability at the local level to do something a little bit more aggressive if they wanted to. We worked with the Kansas Contractors Association and other children advocacy groups because of the two pieces that pertain to their constituent bases. And I believe there's very good consensus amongst those groups. And I've not seen the list of testimony this morning, kind of in the new format, but it's my understanding they're supporting this bill as well. The bill does include a definition for law enforcement, the ability to use their phones during their process. Also, for all drivers, there's an exception for making emergency calls. So that is in there as well. This bill also does not repeal the driving while texting statutes that have already been on the book for several years. We know that was a concern with the way the bills were drafted in previous editions, and so that is something that we took into account as well. It's our understanding as well to bring attention to the question that was voiced earlier by one of the committee members. The definition on page 1, again, line 9, refers to while operating a vehicle. It is our intention that this bill applies to when you're operating a vehicle, if you're pulled off to the side of the road and your vehicle's off, whether you're wherever that scenario may be. We know sometimes people need to take urgent calls. Also, if they're waiting for little Johnny to get out of school and they're off on the side and waiting for his call, they're able to get on the phone and then drive. If that is not clear with the statute and through this process, we are happy to work with to make sure that that is our intent. But it is our understanding that that was cleared up before the introduction of the bill. Also, there was a comment made during the explanation that this would apply to drivers 18 and under. It's actually under the age of 18 is the way the statute reads it. So this would not apply to drivers at 18. It would only apply to drivers under the age of 18. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions and thank the committee again for the opportunity to be here this morning.
Committee questions for Travis? Travis, I have one question. I would ask that you check and make sure that it's perfectly clear, because I know if someone it can be arrested of a DUI if they're sitting alongside of the road with the keys in their vehicle. That hasn't been a problem. That's considered operating the vehicle. Just to clarify that for us, if you would run the traps on that, I'd appreciate it. Committee, further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee.
Next up, we have Ed Klump, Association of Police Chiefs and Kansas Sheriff's Association. Welcome to the committee this year, Ed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be back before you this year. My name is Ed Klump, and I am here representing the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Kansas Sheriff's Association, and the Kansas Peace Officers Association. This is a bill that we have worked with the other proponents on for quite some time to address this distracted driving through the use of cell phones. We continue down that path. We believe it's a very critical thing for us to address. I have, the failing to give full time and attention to driving remains one of the top factors in motor vehicle collisions. 19% of all accidents that we have determined that to be the case. And we know those numbers are low. We know the numbers involving cell phones are low because it's very difficult for us to determine after the fact when a cell phone was used. We can do that, but it's very time intensive. We have to get search warrants for cell phone records and things like that. So we reserve that for very serious injury, accidents, and fatalities. So we know in a lot of cases, these are factors that are not able to be recorded. I put some data on here, and I'm not going to dwell on it. It's there. It supports why we believe this is important. On page 2 of my testimony, I have a chart there I want to point out to you, though. And this is a survey that was done. I forget what year this was done now, but it hadn't been too long ago. And this survey was a nationwide survey. And it shows that in states that already had a hands-free law, 87.2% of the people supported that law. And in the states that did not, 67.2% said they would support it. So there's a majority of the constituents out there that do support a hands-free provision on the law. I want to address a couple of things, if I may. The questions that had come up, one was about, is this a moving violation? Moving violations in the state of Kansas are not determined by statute. They are determined by a Division of Revenue, or Department of Revenue Division of Vehicles regulation. And so they have to specifically list this particular statute in that regulation for it to be a moving violation. They have not added any new violations to that for quite some time, and I wouldn't anticipate they would this one, although they could, but that is a regulatory issue. And if you look at that regulation, it lists each specific violation that is included as a moving violation by statute number, is the way that works. There's a lot of people that believe that if it's in that table of fines, it's a moving violation, and that's not true. It's done by regulation. Also, a question came up about the prima facie case, and what that means is that there is a presumption of guilt. It doesn't mean they are guilty. There is a presumption of guilt, and that defendant still has the right to come into court and rebut that. So it's not an automatic that, you know, you had it in your hand, boom, you're guilty no matter what you have to say. You could come in, for example, and you could make your explanation that you were using it for one of the exempted purposes or some other fact, and the court would entertain that and make a determination. So, Mr. Chairman, I think that hits the main topics. Travis done a good job of covering all the points, along with the revisor explaining what the bill is. I guess since the matter of clarity of operating has come up, I would just say that if you really wanted to clarify that, I would suggest maybe some language that would say something to the effect of that would exempt when a person is, or when the vehicle is legally parked, stopped, or standing. And that would cover the situations such as stopped waiting for your child in front of the school, waiting for your child, when you're sitting in the street and the car's running, things like that. I think that'd be a pretty clear exemption. I can't imagine anybody would enforce this in those situations anyway, but if we wanted to make that clear, I think that'd be a pathway to do that. And I'll stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cluse? Yeah.
Not a question, just a comment that I would support this bill. I'm with the 87.2%. My wife's dad, my father-in-law, was killed by a teenager who was driving, talking on the phone. I would support this.
Senator Clays?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No problem with the under 18 part of this. I think young people should be heavily restricted in their privilege to drive, but just looking at the parts about adults driving through construction zones, and I'm thinking of all the times that I have turned to my phone's navigation to find an alternate route to get out of or around construction. Am I violating the law in that instance? And maybe that's for Adam to help out with, but I'm just thinking of all the times that people use navigation on a phone and that you're suddenly making that illegal, and I'm going to sit in a traffic jam for an hour because I have to wait to get out of that zone to look at my phone.
My only answer to that is I don't see that in the exceptions. So Adam may have a different perspective of that, but if your device is mounted on the dash or something like that, I think you'd be fine. But the way it's written, I think if you had it in your hand looking at it, it'd probably be a problem, and it could be a problem to your attention to what's going on in the construction zone as well. So I think it's a balance that has to be struck there.
Adam, I saw you're unmuted. Do you want to weigh in?
No, I was just going to say I would concur with Mr. Klump on that assessment that would likely, there's no exception for that, so could constitute violation.
Committee, further questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question when appropriate, Senator Hawk.
It's appropriate.
I don't know if this is for Adam, Ed, or Travis, but I heard Travis say the intent of this bill was if you had the phone up to your ear, and that the intent was if you were using it in hands-free mode, that wouldn't apply. But it appears from what Adam has said and what Mr. Klump has said that that's not the case. So I would just make a comment that I think that probably needs to be clarified. So the very thing that Senator Clays was talking about, using your phone in hands-free mode, but in your hand to do navigation, I would detect that Travis was saying they didn't intend for that to be a violation, but I'm hearing the enforcement and the legal end says that it is. So it would look like we need to get a balloon that would clarify that one way or the other, so our public is not confused by that. Thank you.
I believe he stated it was in your hand, but we can go out of order and ask him to come back to answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Hawk for the question as well. On page 1 of the bill, it does provide a number of exceptions. I think hearing the questions, it would be in order to add some additional clarity, an additional line there, just to make sure that we are fully on the same understanding of what the intent of the bill is with the reality of how it will be implemented.
Does that answer your question, Senator Hawk?
I think I heard him say in a very clever way that yes, he needs to get a balloon, and that what Senator Clays was referring to needs to be clarified, so that's not illegal. Is that what I heard you say, Mr. Lowe?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Committee, Senator Clays.
Yeah, just a point of clarification then. So for the people who are under the age of 18, is it also the intent that they be allowed to hold on to their phone at any point in time if it is not being used up against their ear?
Thank you, Senator Clay. So existing state statute as it pertains to the graduated driver's license for the teen drivers that are considered novice drivers that are in those situations when they're 15 or 16 years old, as long as they're part of the graduated driver's license program, they're not allowed to use electronic communication device whatsoever unless they're calling law enforcement. That is the existing state statute today. And this bill would increase that, would put a blanket for anybody that's 16 or 17, anybody under the age of 18 would not be able to do the bill as it pertains, or as it pertains to the bill. So it would be a little bit less stringent if you're not graduated, if you have a regular driver's license, but yet you're under the age of 18. Regardless, they would not be able to be holding it in their phone in their hand whatsoever.
So if I have a regular driver's license, I'm 17 years old, I can or cannot hold my phone and look at the navigation.
It's our understanding that we need to clarify with the amendment as Senator Hawk referenced to make sure that the intent is to not be using your phone, holding your phone in your hand.
I guess that's the thing that I want to understand. Are you saying that you want people to be able to hold their phone in their hand or not hold their phone in their hand? Do you want them to be able to hold their phone to their ear or not be able to hold their phone to their ear?
I understand the question now. I apologize.
Okay, yeah.
So we'll have to circle back with our group, but the intent is to not be holding your hand or holding the phone in your hand while driving. Our intention was to not restrict the vehicle technology that allows for GPSs and other navigation technology to be working in the vehicle, whether it be sitting on your, again, visible in your cup holder or on your Bluetooth screen, what have you, but not to be holding it in your hand. So yes, in that effect, they would not be able to look at their GPS with their phone in their hand under what this bill's intent is.
That's both under the age of 18 and for adults who are in a school or construction zone. The idea is to have that uniform.
Yes, sir. That is the intent of the bill. I think we need to dive into the details with some of the recommendations that Mr. Klump had regarding the stopping and standing of vehicles, picking up Johnny in the school zone, but that is the intent. We understand not all vehicles have a visible screen, but certainly if they have a GPS or using the phone on their Android or iPhone or what have you, if that is in the cup holder, that would work.
It seems to me, and this is more comment than anything else, it seems to me that adults could be educated on the need to not use their phone while in a school or construction zone and that it doesn't require a legal remedy here. Whereas with those who are under the age of 18, being more strict makes sense because we restrict those kinds of licenses.
Yes, sir. There's a lot of merit to the question that you've asked, and I apologize it took me so long to reach the full understanding of the intent of the question and for Senator Hawk as well. And, you know, just to be clear, too, the majority of states already have the teen portion of this on the books. We had a lot of recommendations from legislators and other folks to make this more encompassing for adult drivers as well, but we didn't feel like with the previous history of legislative proposals that we'd be able to maybe be that aggressive. So we did look at some other approaches states have taken. Actually, states have taken a lot of different ideas, but Texas and Arkansas, for example, are incorporating the school zones or construction zones. Those are similar themes. Other states have done other things like prohibition for transit bus drivers or school bus drivers. We didn't go there in this bill, but it kind of gives you a little bit more rationale about how we got to where we did today.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Committee, we do have 3 more proponents, so we're going to need to move on. Next on the agenda is Chris Bortz via WebEx. Chris, can you hear us?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 25. As Travis mentioned, there's been a lot of us sat around for several years, kind of looking at this. How can we do this? And many of the stats that have already been quoted, I'm going to go ahead and take out of here, but they're also in our written testimony that we submitted to the committee. So I want to focus first on, drivers under the age of 18 are overrepresented in motor vehicle crashes. I don't think that's surprising to anybody. This legislation will eliminate their interaction with a handheld cell phone while gaining valuable experience behind the wheel, which is crucial, which is kind of the premise of the graduated driver's license law. Eliminating the use of handheld mobile phones should increase safety in school and road construction zones. I think we've talked about that quite a bit. But a few other points I could make. School zones are unique in that children and motor vehicles are in very close proximity and require motor vehicle operators to have their full, their full and undivided attention behind the wheel. Many road construction zones may have reduced lane widths, higher speed locations, and detours, which all require a driver to be fully focused on the task of driving. When you look at a distracted driver, and I'm sure many of you have seen these, they will actually show similar signs to what an impaired driver has. Failure to maintain a lane, following too closely, failure to maintain a constant speed, slow to engage at a stop sign or signalized intersection, and failure to use a turn signal when turning. All of these factors can increase the likelihood of a crash, and especially in some of the areas that we're talking about in school zones and construction zones. We talked about some Kansas stats, and I know that they're in our testimony, but just to highlight, from 2014 to 2019, 75 persons lost their lives attributed to distracted driving. 34 of the 75 were killed to a mobile phone use. And as was mentioned also, annually about 25% of all crashes are attributed to inattentive driving. When you look at it nationally, and this is according to NHTSA, their 2018 information, 8% of all fatal crashes, 15% of injury crashes, and 14% of all crashes were affected by distraction. Looking at that same year, 2018, 2,841 people were killed and an estimated 400,000 were injured in motor vehicle crashes involving a distracted driver across the nation. We also put in there some, we kind of looked at, as part of another survey that we do, looked at distractions. So what we found is 3% of the drivers out there are engaged in talking on their phone, 2% are texting, and about 2.5% are engaged in other distractions, and or they maybe didn't have facing forward. Maybe they were looking outside or different things like that. I also wanted to touch on, everybody wants to talk about when it comes to distracted driving. Distracted driving crashes are likely underreported, and I think Ed said that as well too. Crash reports detail the officer's observations and conversations with individuals involved or who witnessed the crash. If there were no injuries, many drivers will not admit to being on the phone at the time of the crash. We see that similar with, everybody had their belt on and no, I hadn't been drinking. So it's kind of that same thing. When officers are coming there after the event has happened, these are some of the things that we're seeing. And also to touch on one of the things that Ed had said, in the event of a single person, single vehicle fatality with no witnesses, it is unlikely the state or locals will expend additional resources to determine if the individual was on their phone at the time of the crash. So it kind of highlights once again, if it's only one person, it's unlikely that there'll be an additional investigation. Now, if there's multiple people, multiple vehicles, it is very likely that law enforcement and or prosecutors will look for additional information surrounding that. But if it's just one person by themselves, it's unlikely that we would do that type of investigation. I really do appreciate the time today. I'm happy to answer questions at this time, or I will be here for the entire meeting, so be happy to answer questions at the very end too. I appreciate the time, Chair. Thank you.
I think we'll hold questions till the end since we have two more conferees. Thank you for remaining in the committee. Next up, we have Jennifer Smith, President of Stop Distracted Driving, stopdistractions.org.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad I was able to hear a lot of the discussion, because I hope I can help you out with some of those things. First, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for having me. I am Jennifer Smith. I am the CEO and president of stopdistractions.org. We're an organization consisting of victims' families of distracted driving tragedies across the nation. We also work on hands-free legislation across the nation. And we, get the families out to really share. They are the faces of this issue. They are the ones who have been impacted. We do support this bill, SB 25, as a proponent of the legislation. We feel this is a good next step to eradicating distracted driving in the state. Other states have been taking this even a bit further. Since 2018, we have passed 9 states with hands-free laws for all drivers. That's including Georgia, Tennessee, Arizona, Maine, Massachusetts, Virginia, Indiana, Idaho, Minnesota. That's just a few to name. And COVID last year set us back a little. In these states, we are seeing significant reductions in crashes and fatalities. Insurance rates are beginning to also go down. And we have telematics data that also shows drivers are using their phone less behind the wheel when these laws go into effect. It is about the education, but followed up with a good law and good enforcement. To touch on the phone being in the hand as opposed to just not up to the ear. What we've been doing across the country based on what law enforcement has given us as feedback is that the phone has to be out of the driver's hand completely. So that takes away any other loopholes. I was just holding it for GPS. I was just holding it for this or that. Because drivers actually now, what they're doing behind the wheel is taking Zoom calls, filming TikTok videos. They are doing so many more things than just texting or talking. Getting the phone out of the driver's hand is the most crucial, important part now. And then law enforcement can simply say, the phone was in your hand, you were violating the law. It takes away those loopholes. The other thing is in most of our states that we do this, they do have the additional definition of what legally parked is. So you have to be off the roadway or legally parked. in order to be an exemption to the law. So I think that would be a very good addition to it. Someone brought up the public polling on this and said that, what we're starting to see even in states without laws, we are seeing high 80 to low 90s of support for the laws. And this is across bipartisan, independents, everyone. The public is ready for these laws. It's the powers that be that usually aren't quite as ready. In our school zones and work zones, those are our most vulnerable loved ones. I mean, our family members are working in those schools, work zones. Our children are walking through the school zones, as well as drivers under 18. Again, in most states, drivers under about 18 to 21 are banned from using cell phones at all, even hands-free. So this is actually, a much lighter law for there. The GPS exemption, we also have standard language we use for GPS exemptions for any of these laws that it clearly states out now you cannot hold the phone or you cannot manually enter any information into the GPS while you're driving. You again would have to be legally parked or stopped to manually enter that information. Many GPSs now you can do hands-free, so that solves some of those issues. And the last thing I wanted to say is I don't want to be negative, but the part about educating adults to not use their phones in these school zones and work zones. Sadly, we've been doing this for over a decade, and the ages, the people committing these offenses and killing our loved ones are all ages. They're old, they're young. It goes across the spectrum, and if education were simply enough, I would love that. But due to the COVID lockdowns, we have now seen in our telematics data, this is data showing what drivers are really doing behind the wheel when they're driving based on their insurance apps that they have on their phones. This data is showing distracted driving has gone up 38 to 50% more since COVID due to our excessive use of the technology to stay connected, to do our jobs, to order food. This has accelerated our dependence on our phones, and drivers now who never used their phones when they were behind the wheel are using their phones. I ask you to go check out TikTok. I know it's not something you would probably want to do, but the scary thing to see on that is I would say 50% of the people are filming their TikToks while driving, and these are adults. These are grandparents. These are all ages of the spectrum. So I really think we need to do all we can to protect all ages with a good law, with education and awareness, a good law with tough enforcement, and then finally having technology and engineering solutions like all traffic safety issues have. And with that, I thank you and we welcome any questions at the end if needed.
Excellent. Appreciate you staying on to the end. Next, we have Nicole Allensworth. Nicole, are you still with us? I'm not seeing you on the list.
Actually, this is Jennifer. Nicole actually texted me and never got the link to be able to sign on. So if she could come back at another committee hearing, I know you're in essence of time. You probably don't want me to get her on for you. So.
Okay, well, that saves some time. Committee questions. Seeing none. Committee note there's further written proponent testimony from Michael White with the Kansas Contractors Association, Teresa Taylor, the Kansas Emergency Nurses Association, and Carol Pelly with Stormontville Health, and several doctors with Stormontville. With that, are there any neutrals wishing to testify? Are there any opponents? Seeing none, committee will close the hearing on Senate Bill 25. Is there any further business to come before the committee? Seeing none, we're adjourned.